Hello and welcome to DFS Coach Talk. It's Saturday, December 11th, 2021. I'm Andrew Hanson alongside Josh Crash Davis, ready for the Week 14 NFL Main Slate. Coming off a strong Week 13, Josh, with our predictions and our fantasy lineups. Are you ready to run it back again here this week?
Yeah, definitely ready to do that. You know, we had the talking about our predictions. We had the one prediction with Tom Brady where I said he would get 3 touchdowns and throw at least one touchdown to someone not named Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, or Rob Gronkowski. And he got 4 touchdowns, and he threw a touchdown to Fournette and a touchdown to Cameron Brate. So that was pretty cool to see that play out.
Yeah, that was awesome. And out of your 4 predictions, you got basically 3.5 of them right. I was 2-2, but most importantly, our lineups really did well. We had that Brady to Godwin connection, and he just went off. We had Minshew in some GPP lineups. Yep. So really strong week. Happy for the members. And let's see if we can do it again here. We're once again going to hit the 4 highest totals on the slate as we break down the key games in Week 14. We've had a lot of success with that in recent weeks, zeroing in on those high totals, really breaking down the matchups position by position. So let's do it again here. The games on the docket for today, we'll go Las Vegas, Kansas City, Dallas, and Washington for the early games. And then we'll hit San Fran, Cincinnati, Buffalo, Tampa for the 2 late afternoon hammers, as we like to say. So let's get started with Las Vegas, Kansas City. I've got the road teams here on the early game. So I'll talk about Vegas. And the matchup for the passing game here and the tight ends is probably the best on paper. 8th best matchup for quarterbacks, top 10 matchup for tight ends. But do we really trust Derek Carr to have a ceiling game?
No.
I don't. Yep. And we know that Kansas City really handed it to Vegas when they played back in Week 10, 41-14. And now this one's in KC, and they're favored by 9.5 with a total of 48. So, you know, despite it being a potentially strong matchup for Carr, I just don't trust it right now. We know that the receiver group is in flux. We know that Darren Waller is out. So you could go to Foster Moreau in that good matchup. Decent price here, $4,000 on DraftKings. He did disappoint last week, only 3 targets, caught 1. So he's a possibility. You mentioned your prediction on Renfro, I believe, or that was one of your predictions. He had a big game last week. He was the key target, got his 10 targets. Nobody else had more than 5. So he'd be the guy to look at, I think, as a trustworthy option, but not great numbers for wide receivers against KC. So I am actually most focused on the running game here for Vegas. If I'm going to get some exposure to this side, I'm looking at Josh Jacobs because we know that Drake is out. Jalen Richard is questionable. So it could basically be Josh's backfield, not Crash's backfield, but Josh Jacobs. And, I mean, he's going to be backed up by Peyton Barber, most likely, who really he plays the same style of game as Josh Jacobs. So it's not like the Kenyon Drake type who you're really concerned about coming in, getting a bunch of receptions and stealing a bunch of the key running attempts. So I like Josh Jacobs here. He had over 20 touches last week. And the biggest stat is that he had 9 receptions, which I love. So he's my first prediction here on this slate. I think he's going for 20 DraftKings points. And at 6,200, I like that price. He's my key focus on this side of the ball.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we saw, what Javonte Williams was able to do against Kansas City. And it would make a lot of sense for that to be followed up with what Josh Jacobs could do. He didn't do it in that first matchup, but that doesn't mean he can't. So
exactly. So what are your thoughts here on the home team, the Chiefs?
So, Mahomes, he had that huge game against the Raiders with 406 yards passing and 5 touchdowns. It was easily his best performance of the season, and everyone was thinking, oh, Mahomes is back and Chiefs offense is back. And then they've played Dallas and Denver, and they haven't really been that much greater than they were before they played the Raiders. So he's had very below Mahomes, numbers in the last 2 games against Dallas and Denver. But I think that this is going to be another spot where he can have a nice game. The Raiders have allowed the 11th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. He's projected on Pro Football Focus to be the second highest scoring quarterback on the week. He'll probably be pretty popular, I would think. But with Dallas going up against Washington and them struggling as much as they do, I think Dak Prescott could also see quite a bit of ownership. So it'll be interesting to see who gets the most ownership at quarterback. And then, of course, Travis Kelce, they talked about it during the broadcast that Sunday night, about how he has just feasted on the Raiders. He had, 3 weeks ago, he had 8 catches for 119 yards on 10 targets. Last year, he had 8 catches for 127 yards and a touchdown on 10 targets. And then in the other game, 8 catches for 108 yards and a touchdown on 12 targets. So he's seen a lot of targets and a lot of production. The Raiders have allowed the second most fantasy points to tight ends this year. And I know we don't normally pay up for tight ends, but Kelce's definitely worth paying up for. As we've mentioned in previous weeks, he scored 5 of his 6 touchdowns at Arrowhead. And to go ahead and give my prediction will be that Travis Kelce scores at least 1 touchdown and has more fantasy points than Tyreek Hill.
I like it. I mean, how could you not love Kelce after that description? Yeah. So I'm with you. I'm definitely going to consider him and be willing to pay up at tight end for Kelce.
Yep, for sure. And then in GPPs, I still have some interest in Tyreek Hill. He had a nice game against the Raiders too. He had 83 yards and actually got in the end zone twice. The Raiders have allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, so it's not as good of a matchup on that standpoint, but he's had some success against them recently. And like I said, in a GPP, I think, I would probably look at Tyreek, and then Kelce would be more of a cash play for me.
Yeah, and remember those two touchdowns were, I'm going to call them kind of fluke plays, at least unique, that they were short passes to Hill. Interesting routes. It's not like he just hit him for 2 bombs like we know Tyreek can do. So I do prefer Kelce this week. Any interest in CEH in the backfield, or just more interested in Mahomes potentially and Kelce?
Yeah, we saw what Antonio Gibson did last week against the Raiders. He had 88 yards rushing against them, and he had 5 receptions in the passing game for 23 yards and a touchdown. And I think that, the Raiders, they've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs. I haven't really decided what I'm going to do here. I feel like there's a really good options at running back on this slate, maybe some value too. So Clyde could get into my lineups, but I'm not sure if that's where I'm going to go yet.
All right, excellent. Let's head to game 2. You already mentioned it, Dallas and Washington. And it's also 1:00. Dallas favored by 4.5 here on the road, total 48. By the way, these are both matchups of 8-4 against 6-6. And we're at that point in the season, Josh, aren't we, where it's like everybody seems to be somewhere around 7-5, 6-6. So these are key games. And
also divisional games too.
Also divisional games. So it's getting intense. A lot of fun. These guys haven't played yet this year. They're going to play again in week 16. But for this matchup, you mentioned Dak, and I do like him here. I mean, number 1 matchup for quarterbacks in fantasy points allowed against Washington. They're much better against the run. So I like Dak. He's only 6,700 on DraftKings. And my prediction in this game is that he's going to go for over his average. So he's going to get over 22 DraftKings points and be a real strong consideration, giving you over 3x return. So I like Dak. The question is, do you pair him up with anybody? And if so, who? With the receiving group, Noah Brown is out this week. So we've got back to that standard, the trio that they want. Cooper, Lamb, and Gallup, with Wilson as the 4th option. He's questionable with an ankle. But Cooper, we know that he's still working back from illness. Only played 34% of the snaps against New Orleans. By the way, that was the Thursday game, remember. So Dallas has the extra rest here, 1.5 weeks. So I like the Dallas side even more because of that. But not ready to go to Cooper. I'd like to see him be at 100% and go from there. But in the meantime, I'm going Lamb here as my primary option. We saw what Renfro did last week against Washington with those short slant routes that we know Lamb can match, as Renfro went for 9 for 102. So I like Lamb at 7,200. You could pay up for that duo. And then Gallup would be the GPP option at 5,500 on DraftKings.
Yeah.
And with the running backs here, definitely some moving parts. We've got Pollard questionable. He's got the torn plantar fascia. Sounds like he's probably not going to play, but if he does, that one's too risky for me. And Zeke is too risky for me still on a full slate in not a great matchup. He even came out and said he thinks it'll be 3 to 4 weeks before he gets to 100%. So not going to look there. Washington actually the maximum rushing yards they've given up to any back this year is 71 yards.
Wow.
So I think we fade that mess in the backfield, and we go with Dak and possibly Lamb.
Yeah, I agree. I think the passing game for both of these games is going to be, or both of these teams, I should say, is going to be the way to go. I'm looking at Taylor Heineke on DraftKings. He's only 5,500. That seems like a misprice to me. He's 7,100 on FanDuel, so I don't know if I'm going to get to that. But he's been okay lately. He hasn't been performing at the level he was earlier this year. But Dallas has allowed, they had the game on Thanksgiving Day where they allowed almost 400 yards passing against them with Derek Carr. And I feel like this is going to be a good matchup, a good bounce back spot for Heineke and the Washington offense. They've allowed the fourth fewest fantasy points to running backs. So that's another reason why I think this is going to favor the passing game. Obviously, if we're going to look at the passing game, the first option for Washington, especially with Logan Thomas out, is going to be Terry McLaurin. 7,100 on FanDuel, 7,000 on DraftKings. He only saw 5 targets last week against the Raiders, where they were relying more on the running game. So this should be a good bounce back spot for him. They've allowed the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Pro Football Focus says that Terry McLaurin has the 3rd best matchup advantage on the slate, with an 80.2 ranking against all Dallas defenders. And then if you want to pay down at tight end, I know we talked about earlier about paying up at tight end with Kelsey, but you could look at Ricky Seals-Jones with Logan Thomas out. He's only 3,600 on DraftKings, so that's really cheap. Dallas has allowed the 11th most fantasy points to tight ends. And to go back to my prediction, it's for Terry McLaurin to have 6+ catches on 7+ targets. So.
Yeah, good stuff. I mean, I think McLaurin is due. He's had a couple down weeks, and I do like the matchup, like you said. The one cautionary tale here, Dallas's defense is getting healthier, and we know they've been pretty strong lately with Lawrence and Parsons and Diggs. So that makes me hesitate a little bit about the Washington offense. But like I said, I do think McLaurin is due for a big day. So we'll see if they can get it in his hands more than they have. And like you said, good value price on Ricky Seals-Jones if you want to go there.
Yeah. I think a lot of people could go back to Antonio Gibson after his big week last week, and that can end up being a trap. So,
yep. And then we'll see who else is going to be out there. J.D. McKissick questionable, Smallwood also questionable. But I agree. I think we take the winnings with Gibson last week, and we put him on hold, and we look elsewhere in the backfield.
Yep. I agree.
All right. Well, speaking of winnings, hopefully we'll put some more together for our members. If you want to join this week, go to dfscoachtalk.com, sign up for whichever length of membership you'd like. You could try the 5-day pass, and anything you do, you'll get all of our sports while you're in Discord. Sign up Sunday morning, and then we'll get you in before we give out lineups just after noon Eastern. dfscoachtalk.com to sign up. Any questions, you can find us on Twitter at dfscoachtalk. All right. By the way, what you'll get there is the full DraftKings clipboard with core plays and other roster options to fill out your lineup. Then the full cash and GPP lineups on both FanDuel and Yahoo that you can just plug and play. Pretty easy.
Yep.
All right. Second half of our slate here, the key 4:00 games. We've got San Francisco at Cincinnati at 425. This total 48.5, San Fran favored by 1.5. And you've got the road teams here on the second half of our show. So kick off the San Fran side for us.
Yeah, so for San Francisco, they've got some injuries they're dealing with. You've got Eli Mitchell, who was ruled out. That's probably the biggest one. They got a couple injuries on the defensive side of the ball as well. And then their backup running back, Trenton Cannon, is also out. So the other big piece of news is going to be if Deebo Samuel plays. If he does play, he's 8,000 on DraftKings, 8,500 on FanDuel. He should be heavily involved in the running game as well as the passing game, like we saw before when Mitchell was out. And Cincinnati has allowed the 11th most fantasy points to wide receivers. If Samuel's out, then Ayuk would be the top wide receiver play, and he would be in play for me. He's only 5,800 on DraftKings. And then obviously if Samuel's out, then George Kittle will once again be the top pass catching option. He's 6,900 on DraftKings, 7,100 on FanDuel. Last week he saw a season high 12 targets. Obviously he had a huge game and made the most of that opportunity with 9 catches for 181 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cincinnati's been a little above average this year with ranking 13th against tight ends. But if Samuel's out, I think that he's just going to see Kittle will continue to see a heavy target share. And especially because they've really struggled when Mitchell has been out to run the ball. So that's how I feel about the passing game. If you want to go with a deep sleeper GPP play, you could look at JaMychal Hasty. He's 4,000 on DraftKings. Like I said, Wilson has really struggled. He's averaged less than 3 yards a carry when he's been in there. And Cincinnati has allowed the 10th most fantasy points to running backs. So he could be a nice GPP option. And if Samuel plays, my prediction is that he will have the most rushing yards for San Francisco. If he's out, my prediction is that Kittle will score at least 1 touchdown.
Okay, I like that prediction. It's a perfect example of how you got to adjust the game plan and your exposure to a certain team based on a key injury like that. That's an interesting one for Debo to be the leading rusher. It certainly is possible. And Wilson, in fact, only 2.7 yards per carry, so well under 3 per carry, just not good. I did play him that 1 week and was not happy. He got the big volume and lots of touches in the red zone, but didn't get it done. Yeah. He's only 4,400 on DraftKings. So this is a real conundrum for me because he hasn't performed well, but solid matchup. We know San Fran loves to run it. Great price. So he's on my radar. Could be a value running back on the other side of the ball to talk about. So we'll just see how everything plays out with the slate.
Yeah.
Debo in general, though, scares me a little bit. I mean, he's ultra talented, but been dealing with the groin. So I don't think I want to spend 8,000 and up for him. And I agree. If he's out, once again, we got to look at Ayuk and Kittle. Ayuk, I think it could be his turn. Only 5,800 on DraftKings. He'd be the guy I probably would most like to play here if Debo is out.
Yeah.
All right, on the Cincinnati side here, the home team. Big news here is that Joe Burrow, he's got the right pinky injury. And he says that he's adjusted his grip. That just scares me a little bit. San Fran, we mentioned this stat about a week ago, I think, because of that matchup with Cousins. 2 touchdowns max that they've allowed since week 1. And my prediction is that Burrow will not exceed that. He's going to go 2 touchdowns max. It is an above average, barely above average matchup for quarterbacks. And his price tag is good for him at 6,000. I just don't trust the adjusted grip. He's an athlete. He could get it done, but I'd rather go elsewhere. Maybe I'll get to one of his receivers. The guys on the outside have done well against San Fran. Guys like Devontae, D-Hop, Pittman. So Higgins and Chase are in play. We know that Higgins has been much better recently than Chase. And he's cheaper. Awesome matchup rating on PFF, 94.2 for Higgins.
Yeah.
Can it be another week, though, that he gets the touchdown and the big catch numbers? It's possible. Tough to really count on it, though. So I'm sort of on the fence there. And then with the backfield, big question mark with Mixon. Questionable with the illness, hasn't been practicing. Does he get out there? It's a good matchup, top 10 for running backs. He's expensive, though, at 7,700 on DraftKings. If he's out, then this is the guy that I was mentioning here, Samaje Perine, 4,200. He has been much better on the season than Wilson. He's averaged 4.4 yards per carry when he's been out there. So there's a guy to keep in mind as we track the news, and we'll see if we get it early enough with this being a late game. And we're recording this on Saturday afternoon, so we're about 24 hours ahead of time.
Right.
But things kind of up in the air for me on Cincinnati, possibly Higgins, possibly P. Ryan.
Yeah.
Anything different for you there?
No, I was looking at probably Higgins would be my top play for the Bengals. I just don't think that Chase has been consistent enough for me. In a GPP, you could go to Chase, but for a cash play, I would definitely lean towards Higgins. He's just been more reliable. So
Excellent. All right, last game of the show today. It's the highest total on the board, Buffalo and Tampa, 53.5, and Tampa favored by 3.5 at home. You've got the road team here, the Bills. What are your thoughts there?
you said 53.5 for the over-under. Yeah, that seems a little high to me, honestly, but we'll see what happens. I think that Stephon Diggs, they're going to be plenty of opportunities for him. We've seen some of the top wide receivers that have gone up against Tampa. They haven't faced the best quality wide receivers this year if you look at who they've faced. But Russell Gage had 11 catches for 130 yards. Cooper Kupp had 9 for 96 and 2 touchdowns. And then Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb both had good games against them in the opener. Cooper had 13 for 139 and 2 touchdowns. Lamb had 7 for 104 and a touchdown. So Diggs is definitely more than capable of putting up those kind of numbers. Should be a nice week for him to bounce back and probably find the end zone once again. My prediction for him is that he has 75 plus receiving yards in this game and scores a touchdown. The other option for me, and I don't feel like there's a lot for Buffalo in this game, but Dawson Knox is 5,000 on DraftKings. Tampa has allowed the 10th most fantasy points to tight ends. 2 weeks ago, they allowed Jack Doyle to kind of get loose a little bit. He had 6, catches for 81 yards and a touchdown. And Knox has been a top 10 tight end this year in fantasy. This should be a good bounce back spot for him after facing the tough Patriots defense.
Yeah, I think it's worth considering one of these pass catchers. Diggs, obviously the number one target. I'll just add in on Beasley as a potential GPP play. A couple of those guys you mentioned that had big games like Gage, and that's the type of role that Beasley can carve out. He has had a bunch of low volume games, but they do seem to game plan occasionally with him. I think this could be that type of week. I just wish he was less than 5,000 on DraftKings. The times I like to target Beasley, he's high 3K or in the 4K range.
Right.
So definitely a GPP option there.
Mm-hmm.
Any interest in Josh Allen or the running backs?
I'm probably not looking at Josh Allen for his price. I would rather lean towards the, Dak Prescott's, Patrick Mahomes of the world. And then the running backs, they got that 3-back split now, basically between Singletary, Moss, and Breida. And I just don't want to touch that. And Tampa's just so tough against the run anyway. So
exactly. Yeah, zero interest in the running backs for me because of those factors. Josh Allen, he's got my prediction in this game. I think he's going for over 300 yards passing. I think they do need to pass it, and they'll want to pass it. They're not going to want to use those running backs. Remember, we saw in that crazy game against New England where New England passed it 3 times and Buffalo threw it 30 times. So 10 times as much in those terrible conditions. Mm-hmm. It just reinforces that they want to throw it. They want the ball in Josh Allen's hands. Yeah. And this is a top 10 matchup for quarterbacks. So I think he's going to chuck it a bunch and get over 300 yards.
Yeah, you talk about an extreme change in environments going from that to Tampa.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Likely 80 degrees and so much different.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's talk about that Tampa Bay side. They'll be ready and used to that nice Florida sun. And AB still out. Big news there, of course. Richard Sherman is back in to help bolster that secondary that's been getting healthier. Now, tough matchups here for Tampa. Again, it sort of plays into probably what you were saying about 53.5 seems a little bit high here. I don't know how they're going to get there. We know we have terrific players all over the field, including on offense, but I don't think it's going to be easy. So I'm not going to go to Tom Brady. It's the number one most difficult matchup for quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. The receivers, number one most difficult. If you look at the running backs, that's the okay matchup, sort of middle of the road. And we saw New England run for 222 yards against Buffalo. Obviously, that was that unique game situation where they just decided to run it almost every down. But we know that that's been the one little chink in the armor for Buffalo recently, right? Indianapolis had the huge rushing game. Tennessee got it done against them earlier. So Fournette is probably my favorite target on Tampa. He is expensive at 7,400, but I really like how he continues to be involved in the passing game. 7 catches in that last game against Atlanta. And that reminds me, actually, Josh, one of my favorite stats from the week last week. Tampa Bay started that game with 14 straight passes. So, once again, great reminder how important it is to try to predict game flow, strategy, and matchups. And sometimes teams are smart like that, and they'll just try to, either go to their strengths or avoid a weakness. And this game, I think, is a perfect example where you look at that, and Fournette, I think, will be more involved. And on that flip side, that's why I think Buffalo is they're just gonna pass it. They're gonna get it in Allen's hands. And he's gonna chuck it. So Fournette, probably my favorite play on Tampa. Evans and Godwin have actually the same matchup rating on PFF. Evans is a little bit cheaper. Maybe it's his turn after Godwin had all those targets and 15 catches last week. And Gronk, has really been strong, but can he do it again? I'm going to say I'm not willing to go there. So Fournette or possibly Evans.
Yeah. Fournette was one of the first players I put into my cash lineup when I did my first build. So definitely like Fournette.
Okay. All right. Anything else on this game or the slate? Or are we ready to start our recording on the Primetime podcast, which is coming up later this weekend?
Yeah, I think we're about ready to transition into the next one. So.
All right, great. Well, hopefully that helps everybody, break down those 4 highest totals on the board, key games this week. Appreciate everybody's support. We will have that Primetime podcast out later this weekend to get you ready for Sunday night and Monday night and those showdown slates. But good luck on the main slate. Jump in with us at dfscoachtalk.com if you want to play our lineups. And we look forward to seeing you on the next NFL podcast. NBA coming 7 days a week, of course. Josh was on today with Coach, and we've got Omaha Joe tomorrow. So make sure to check that out as we bring some different options to you in NBA. All right. On behalf of Josh Crash Davis and the rest of the DFS Coach Talk team, I'm Andrew Hanson. We'll see you next time as we look to crush it in DFS.